My stepson said his father would never be this weak. I canceled his tuition, pulled my name from everything, and left. He realized it too late. Don't forget to subscribe and share your experiences below. Let's get started. When I married Melissa, I told myself it was love. That's what people say when they want to believe the story they're living. But beneath that word, love, I think I was chasing something quieter, something I'd never had before. Stability. The feeling that when I came home, the air would stop spinning, that I could finally plant my hands in the soil of a life that wouldn't shift beneath me. Melissa had a son, Alex, 10 years old, a boy who carried his father's shadow like a birthright. John, the man who'd given him his last name but nothing else, lived just an hour away and still managed to be a ghost. He appeared twice a year, Christmas and Alex's birthday. He'd bring gifts that looked expensive but felt hollow. A watch too big for a child's wrist, a baseball glove that smelled like leather and absence. Then he'd vanish, leaving Melissa to pick up the pieces, leaving me to explain to Alex why his father had to go back to work. I stepped in without hesitation. I thought consistency would mean something. I drove Alex to school, stood in the cold bleachers through his soccer games, packed lunches, paid for every field trip, every doctor's visit, every scraped knee that required a copay and patience. When he was sick, I sat by his bed, reading the same book over and over until he fell asleep. When he wanted a bike, I saved 3 months to get it. He didn't know that, kids never do. I told myself it didn't matter, that one day he'd understand. I wasn't just trying to win a boy's approval. I was building a family out of fractures. I thought love could graft bloodlines together, that devotion could overwrite DNA. I believed that if you gave enough of yourself, the universe would notice, that maybe one day, when Alex was grown, he'd look back and see who had truly been there for him. But life doesn't reward devotion. It feeds on it. First, things seemed fine. Melissa would smile when she saw us together. Me teaching him to change a tire, or sitting through another mindless cartoon just to make him laugh. I believed her silence meant trust. I didn't see what it really was, a warning. She was watching to see if I'd last longer than the others. Years blurred together. I worked longer hours, took overtime when it was offered, learned to live on less so Alex could live on more. Camp fees, school trips, braces, all the things John never paid for. I handled them without complaint. When Alex turned 16, I bought him his first car, used but clean, safe. I remember the way his eyes lit up, that short, startled joy that looked like gratitude. For a brief moment, I thought I'd earned something real. That illusion died quickly. As Alex grew older, something hardened in him. It began subtly, a shrug instead of a thank you, an eye roll when I offered advice, the way he'd correct people who assumed I was his father. "He's my stepdad," he'd say, emphasizing the first half like a brand. First, I laughed it off. Teenagers, I thought, they test boundaries, push against the people who care most. But the edge in his tone cut deeper each year. When he turned 18, I paid for college. Full tuition, housing, a credit card under my name so he wouldn't struggle. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd mature, that this was the final stretch before we became equals. Man to man, father to son. I thought wrong. Freedom revealed who he really was. The calls came less often. The thank yous stopped altogether. Melissa and I would sit at dinner, waiting for him to visit, pretending the silence between us wasn't heavy with absence. She still defended him. "He's busy, college is hard, you know how boys are." But her words had the thin, strained tone of a mother clinging to excuses. Then came the comparisons. Subtle at first, like cracks in a window pane you pretend not to see. "Dad said he'd help me find an internship. Dad says he understands me better than you do. Dad never lectures me like this." Each sentence was a blade hidden in small talk. Every mention of John reminded me that blood doesn't have to be present to haunt a house. Melissa never stopped him. Sometimes she even smiled when Alex spoke of his father, as if grateful that he still mentioned the man at all. I told myself to let it go, to be the bigger man, to not compete. But there's only so long a man can live as a ghost in his own home. I remember one night, his sophomore year, when he came home for a weekend. I'd grilled steaks, opened a bottle of wine, tried to make it feel like old times. Halfway through dinner, he started talking about John again, bragging about how his real dad was planning to take him on a trip after graduation. The words hit me like cold water. Real dad. The phrase clung to the air between us, heavy, deliberate. I asked him what that made me, half joking, trying to defuse the weight of it. He didn't look up from his plate. You're just, Melissa's husband. Just that word. Small, dismissive, lethal. I looked at Melissa, waiting for her to correct him, to say something, anything, but she didn't. She stayed quiet, cutting her food slowly, as if pretending not to hear. I think that silence hurt more than his words, because it told me she agreed, maybe not aloud, but in the way that counts. After dinner, I went outside. I stood in the yard under the same window where I used to hear him laugh as a boy. Now the room was dark. I looked up and realized that all those years, the lunches, the drives, the payments, the patience, had built nothing. I wasn't his father. I was a convenience, placeholder, a wallet with a heartbeat. Still, I kept paying. The next semester, the next car repair, the next trip he needed. I told myself this was what love looked like. Persistence, forgiveness, sacrifice. But beneath it, I was feeding resentment, mine and his. He saw my giving as weakness, and I saw his taking as proof that I'd failed. The line between love and servitude blurred until it disappeared. There's a special kind of loneliness that only exists inside families, when you live among people who share your space but not your respect. You move through the same rooms, breathe the same air, but you're invisible. They see what you provide, not who you are. You become infrastructure, necessary, silent, taken for granted. Melissa still kissed me goodnight, but even that felt like habit, not affection. We spoke less, laughed less. When she looked at me, it was often with a kind of exhausted gratitude, the way someone looks at a light bulb that hasn't burned out yet. Useful, dependable, replaceable. By the time Alex finished his sophomore year, I stopped pretending. Something in me had begged *N to rot. That quiet bitterness that creeps in when you realize all your sacrifices were investments in a lie. I started keeping receipts for every payment I made. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted to see the evidence, to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I had given more than anyone could ask. When I looked at those numbers, a thought whispered through me, cruel and liberating. You bought your own irrelevance. Still, I didn't stop. Couldn't. Love, once it mutates into duty, doesn't die easily. It lingers like a sickness, feeding on hope. And I held on until the night he crossed the line. That night started like any other. Dinner, small talk, the weight of unspoken things pressing on the table. He mentioned his father again. Casually, like a knife slipped between ribs, and for the first time I saw no trace of the boy I had raised. Only a man rehearsing his cruelty. It was then that I understood what I had become. A man pretending to be a father in a house that had already chosen its ghosts. The first cracks had turned to fractures. The illusion was collapsing. And somewhere deep down, I knew, the next words out of his mouth would shatter whatever remained. It happened at dinner. Not one of those peaceful, picture-perfect meals you see in family photos, but the kind where the air feels heavy before anyone even speaks. The kind of dinner where you already know something is going to break, even if you can't name it yet. Melissa had cooked roast chicken, the same meal she made whenever she wanted things to feel normal. Alex was home from college for the weekend, his phone on the table beside his plate, face down but not off. He was always waiting for a message from someone more important. His mother smiled too much, spoke too gently, as if politeness could glue us all back together. I remember the sound of the knife against the plate, the tick of the wall clock, the smell of gravy cooling in the open air. I asked about his classes. I asked if he was going to the lectures he'd missed last week. It was a simple question, maybe too simple, but I already knew the answer. He smirked, a small, practiced twist of the mouth that said he was ready for a fight. "Don't worry about it," he said. "I'm handling it." "You've skipped too many," I replied. "The school already sent a notice. You're wasting money you didn't earn." He leaned back, crossed his arms. eyes glinting in that cruel way young men use when they want to wound. You act like it's your money. Melissa froze. She knew where this was going. I could see it in the way her fork stopped midair, her eyes darting between us. It is my money, I said quietly. Every class, every meal, every mile on that car outside. It's all mine. Maybe start treating it that way. He laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a boyish mistake. It was something colder, deliberate. My dad would never let himself be that weak. There it was. The line. Short, perfect, rehearsed in the cruel language of inheritance. I felt it hit, not in my chest but deeper, somewhere in the part of me that had built a life for him brick by brick. All those years, all those bills, all those quiet nights when I worked extra hours so he wouldn't have to feel the strain, erased in one sentence. Melissa said his name softly, as if saying it could pull the words back. He ignored her. He stared at me, waiting for me to rise, to argue, to shout. But I didn't. I just stared at the boy who wasn't mine, the boy I had fed, clothed, defended, carried. Weak, that's what he called me. He thought kindness was weakness. He thought being steady, being dependable, being the one who stayed made me small. He didn't see that it was the only strength I had left. I didn't finish my meal. I didn't even look at him again. I just set down my fork and stood up. Melissa started to speak. Please, just sit. Don't. But I was already walking to my office. I closed the door behind me and sat in the dark, listening to the sound of their voices fading into whispers. Then silence. That silence was louder than any shouting could have been. I don't remember how long I sat there. Only that something inside me had shifted. For years, I told myself I was doing the right thing, that giving was love, that patience was strength. But in that moment, it all turned clear. I had been feeding a parasite. Every gesture of generosity had been mistaken for submission. Every sacrifice an admission of guilt for a crime I never committed. And now the bill had come due. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still. Melissa was asleep, Alex's door closed. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and opened my laptop. The screen glowed cold against the dark. I started with the bank. One click to remove my name from his accounts. Another to cancel the automatic tuition payments. Then the credit card, the one I had co-signed, the one he used to fill his car, buy his clothes, take his girlfriend out. I called the company and told them to close it. They asked if I wanted to keep him as an authorized user. I said no, not anymore. Then the insurance company, health, car, dental. His name came off every plan. By the time the sun rose, I had cut every financial thread that tied me to him. I did it slowly, deliberately, not with anger but with precision. Each click was a kind of burial, not of him, but of the illusion I had lived in. I didn't tell Melissa. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed a small bag. Shirts, razor, toothbrush. The quiet things a man needs when he plans to disappear. I left my wedding ring on the dresser. It looked small in the morning light, like something that had outlived its purpose. When Melissa woke, she found the coffee pot half full, the chair pushed neatly under the table. She must have called my name once, twice. But by then I was already driving. No yelling, no goodbye, no explanations. I had said everything I needed to say by doing nothing at all. The highway stretched ahead, empty and gray, the kind of road that erases sound. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running late for something. I wasn't rushing toward anyone. I was just leaving. And yet, even as the miles passed, his words stayed with me. My dad would never let himself be that weak. They repeated in my head until they began to lose meaning, until they became rhythm instead of speech. Still, they burned. He thought manhood was measured in defiance. He thought I was a failure because I didn't shout, didn't strike, didn't demand obedience. But real strength isn't in noise. It's in walking away when you've given everything and received nothing but contempt. By the time I stopped for gas, I realized something simple and terrible. I had never been a father in his eyes, only a convenience. He would mourn the money, not the man. I looked at my reflection in the station window. Gray stubble, hollow eyes. a face that had worked itself to exhaustion trying to prove it deserved a title that would never be given. I didn't look strong or weak. I just looked finished. That night, I checked into a small motel off the interstate. The walls were thin, the sheets smelled like bleach, and the air conditioner rattled like a dying engine. But it was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the phone. Melissa had called, 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails I didn't play. I didn't need to hear her voice to know what she'd say. She'd ask me to come home, to talk, to forgive. But I was done forgiving. For the first time, the silence felt clean. Not peaceful. Just empty, stripped of noise, stripped of need. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to earn a place that was never mine. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time I told him I'm proud of you and meant it. All of it had been wasted on someone who measured love by blood and pride by cruelty. That night, I slept without dreams. When I woke, I didn't feel regret, just clarity. If being weak meant giving, then I had been weak. If being strong meant cutting ties, then I was finally learning. He wanted to see what strength looked like. He would. Not in words, not in anger, but in absence. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't plan anything at all. I just knew this. I would no longer live in a house where my name was spoken like a curse. I would no longer pay for love that was counterfeit. They would notice the silence soon enough. The bills would arrive. The payments would stop. The comfort would crumble. And maybe then, just maybe, they'd understand what kind of man they had called weak. But by then, I wouldn't be there to see it. A few days later, the calls started. First from Melissa, then from numbers I didn't recognize. The kind of calls that keep ringing even when you know they won't end with anything good. I ignored them at first, let them pile up like junk mail. But on the 4th day, curiosity or maybe some leftover guilt made me answer. Melissa's voice came through cracked, trembling. They sent a notice from the university, she said. Tuition's overdue. They're threatening to suspend him. What did you do? Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror, trying to keep the panic out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I just said, I stopped paying for a man who thinks I'm weak. Silence. Then a single, sharp breath. You're punishing him. No, I said. I'm teaching him. She hung up before I could say anything else. I sat in that motel room with the phone still in my hand, listening to the faint hum of the dial tone until it vanished. The quiet after was heavy, but not unbearable. I'd lived with worse. That night, Alex called from a blocked number. I didn't recognize his voice at first. It had that strained, brittle edge of someone trying to sound in control while the world collapses behind them. Did you cancel my tuition? He asked. Yes. Why? You already answered that for me at dinner, I said. Ask your real dad for help. There was a pause, long, hollow, filled with the sound of someone realizing that a door had closed for good. Then the call ended. After that, nothing. No more messages, no more pleading. Just silence. And for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel like punishment. Felt like peace. Weeks passed. I found a small apartment across town. Nothing special. Just 4 walls and a view of the parking lot. But it was mine. No photographs on the walls. No echoes of someone else's laughter. No sense of waiting for footsteps that never came. I slept through the night for the first time in months. Sometimes I'd catch myself expecting Melissa's voice or the sound of Alex's car in the driveway. But the world had gone quiet around me, like the house itself had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. Then, slowly, pieces of the story reached me through friends, through whispers. Alex had dropped out, couldn't pay. The university sent final notices, then packed up his things when the balance stayed overdue. He moved back in with Melissa, or tried to. But John, the great absent father, wasn't interested in being a safety net. Money's tight, he'd said, as if that could erase 2 decades of neglect. Melissa called me again, softer this time. He needs your help, she said, just until he gets back on his feet. I remember staring at the phone, imagining her sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where all of this began. I could picture the tear tracks, the shaking hands, the half-empty glass of wine beside her. She wanted me to fix what they had broken, to go back to being the invisible glue. "Melissa," I said quietly, "I'm done being a wallet for people who despise my name." She cried then, real, breaking sobs that used to tear something open in me. But not this time. Not anymore. I let her cry, said nothing, waited until she hung up. Then I sat there, staring at the wall, feeling something close to relief. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge. It was the clean numbness that comes when the noise finally stops. In the evenings, I'd walk down to the edge of the parking lot and watch the highway lights blur into gold lines. I thought about how strange it was that the world kept moving, that traffic still hummed, that strangers still laughed in nearby apartments while my old life slowly fell apart somewhere else. I didn't miss the house. I missed the idea of it, the illusion of being needed, of matching. But illusions rot when you hold them too long. One afternoon I saw them. It was by accident, the kind of cruel coincidence life seems to enjoy. I was leaving the grocery store, pushing a cart of basics, rice, coffee, the kind of things a man buys when he's stopped trying to impress anyone. And there, in the next aisle, stood Alex. He was thinner, his hair longer, unkempt. He wore a hoodie that looked too big, hands stuffed deep into the pockets. There were no phones, no friends, no bravado. Just him and a few cheap groceries, instant noodles, milk, bread. He saw me before I saw him. Our eyes met for half a second. Then he looked away, quick and sharp like a reflex. That single gesture told me everything I needed to know. He didn't hate me. Hate takes energy. He feared me, or maybe he feared what I'd revealed in him. The weakness he'd mocked was his own reflection, staring back at him through the glass doors of a grocery freezer. I didn't approach him. I didn't say his name. I just paid for my things and walked out. As I reached the parking lot, I heard the automatic doors hiss behind me. I turned just enough to see him standing there, watching me leave. For a moment, I thought he might call out, that maybe the silence had lasted long enough. But he didn't. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, and let me walk away again. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of guilt that had burned out long ago, but because I finally understood something I hadn't before. I hadn't left to hurt them. I'd left because staying would have led whatever was left of me. You can't keep feeding people who only take. You can't keep proving your worth to those who've already decided you have none. The next morning, I brewed coffee, opened the window, and let the cold air fill the room. The city moved outside, cars starting, dogs barking, life continuing without permission. I stood there for a long time, thinking about how endings don't really happen all at once. They just stretch out, quieter and quieter, until one day you realize there's nothing left to lose. Sometimes I wonder if Melissa blames herself. I think she does, though she'd never say it aloud. She kept peace by keeping quiet, and silence has its own cost. Maybe she thought she was protecting him from conflict, but all she did was teach him that words have no consequence, that he could spit on a man's devotion and still be fed by it. And now she lives with the silence too. I still see her sometimes, at the market, or driving past the gas station near my place. We never speak. We nod briefly like people who share a crime, because that's what it feels like now, a crime we both committed and both survived. Alex doesn't look at me. He walks past, head down, pretending not to see. I let him. I've learned that some lessons aren't spoken. They're lived, day after day, in the space where pride used to be. Sometimes, when the nights are long and the apartment is too quiet, I catch myself wondering if I went too far, if maybe I should have given him one more chance. But then I remember his words, that smirk, that sentence that rewrote 16 years of my life. My dad would never let himself be that weak. And I realize I finally proved him wrong. Because walking away, leaving them to face the cost of their own contempt, was the strongest thing I've ever done. Still, strength doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like standing in an empty room, listening to your own heartbeat and wondering if anyone will ever deserve it again. The silence hasn't left me. It's followed me, like a faithful dog, quiet, watchful, unyielding. I think it always will, but I've made peace with it, because silence, at least, doesn't lie. Now I live across town, A small apartment above a mechanic's shop. Nothing special. Just 2 rooms and a balcony that faces west. In the evenings, the sun spills through the blinds, painting the walls in rust and orange. It's quiet here. Too quiet sometimes. But quiet at least doesn't argue. Quiet doesn't ask for money. Quiet doesn't call me weak. The first few weeks felt like stepping out of a long storm. I kept expecting the phone to ring, to hear Melissa's voice again. That soft, careful tone she used when she wanted something fixed without saying the word help. But the phone stayed still. No apologies. No explanations. Just absence, stretching out like a new kind of horizon. I started building small rituals to fill the silence. Coffee at dawn. Walks around the block. Fixing things that didn't need fixing, loose cabinet hinges, a leaky faucet, the hum in the old fridge. A man gets used to repair. It's what we do best. But this time, I was fixing a life I'd spent years breaking for someone else's comfort. Sometimes, when the night got too long, I'd drive past the old house. Not to spy, just to remind myself it was real. The porch light still worked. Melissa had changed the curtains. The lawn looked unkempt, though. Weeds creeping up where I used to mow every Sunday. It's strange how fast a place decays once the man who maintained it walks away. I never went inside. I just sat in the car for a while, watching the shadows move behind the windows, and then I left before anyone could notice. Freedom isn't what I thought it would be. It doesn't sing. It doesn't shine. It just sits beside you, heavy and patient, asking if you can live with what it costs. A month passed before I saw them again. I was in the grocery store, pushing a cart filled with the kind of food a man eats alone. Bread, canned soup, black coffee. I turned the corner and saw Melissa first. She was thinner, tired. Her hair pulled back in a rush, her eyes somewhere else. She didn't notice me at first, not until Alex appeared behind her, carrying a half-empty basket. He looked older, not in years but in defeat. There was a kind of tremor in the way he moved, like a man learning humility through hunger. The arrogance was gone, stripped by the small humiliations of life. Overdue rent, unpaid bills, friends who stop calling when you can't keep up. For a moment, we just stood there, the 3 of us, frozen among the cereal boxes and fluorescent lights. Melissa's lips parted like she might say something, but Alex turned away first. He pretended to read a label, his shoulders rigid, his neck flushed. I nodded once, not out of forgiveness, but acknowledgement. A truce of silence. Then I pushed my cart forward and kept walking. I didn't look back. That night, I thought about him more than I wanted to. I pictured him counting coins at the counter, wondering how to stretch what little he had. Maybe calling John, only to hear the same excuses. I'll help next month. Things are tight right now. I wondered if Melissa still defended him, still told herself that I was cruel, that cutting them off had been vengeance instead of survival. But I wasn't cruel. I was honest. Cruelty is pretending everything's fine while your soul bleeds dry. Honesty is closing the door when you know no one inside will ever respect you again. A few days later, a letter came. Handwritten, the kind you don't see much anymore. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Alex's, shaky, uneven. It wasn't long. I understand now. I'm sorry. That's all it said. No plea, no request for money, no signature. Just those 5 words. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the drawer with my tools. I didn't write back. What was there to say? Apologies don't rebuild what contempt destroyed. They just echo in the ruins, too late to matter. Life went on. I got a new job at a small hardware store. The kind of place where time moves slower, where people still pay in cash and call you sir. The owner, an old man with a limp, asked if I had a family. I said no. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Men like us always do. Sometimes, on my way home, I stopped by the lake. The same one where I used to take Alex fishing when he was younger. Back when he still laughed. Back when he still reached for my hand without realizing it. The dock is cracked now, the wood gray with years. I sit there until the sun drops, listening to the water slap against the shore, and I wonder if he ever thinks about those mornings. If he remembers the way I taught him to tie a line, or how proud he looked when he caught his first fish. Maybe he does. Maybe he's trying to forget. I've learned that memory is its own punishment. Keeps you company when no one else will, whispering what you should have said, what you should have done differently. But then I remind myself, I did what I had to do, because love without respect is rot. It's a house with termites chewing through the beams while you smile for family photos. And one day, no matter how much you've painted the walls or patched the holes, it collapses anyway. Melissa and Alex built their house on my back. They rested on my labor, my paychecks, my silence. When the structure fell, they called it cruelty. But I call it gravity. You can't defy what you've been ignoring forever. Now, when I wake before dawn, the first thing I hear is the hum of the city. Not voices, not arguments, just life continuing somewhere beyond my walls. I make coffee, open the window, and breathe. The air smells different when no one depends on you. Cleaner somehow. And yet, sometimes I catch myself imagining another version of life. One where Alex grew into kindness instead of pride. One where Melissa chose to defend me instead of her comfort. In that world, maybe we're still sitting around the dinner table, laughing. Maybe the word family still means something. But that world doesn't exist. It never did. What I have now is peace. Not the kind people write songs about, but the real kind. The quiet aftermath of losing everything that once drained you. The kind that doesn't smile, but breathes evenly. I saw Alex one last time months later, at a gas station just outside town. He was filling an old car, dented and dull. He looked up and saw me. For a second, I thought he might come over. But he just gave a small nod, half respect, half resignation, then got in his car and drove away. That nod was enough. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was acknowledgement, the smallest form of truth. I stood there watching the taillights fade, and I realized I didn't need anything else. Not from him. Not from Melissa. Not from the life I left behind. Sometimes the best lesson you can teach is to leave. Let time do what words never could. Let absence show them who carried everything when they thought you were weak. I drove home that night under a quiet sky, the city lights blurring in the mirrors. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. I felt solid, present, free. Still, sometimes, when the wind rattles the window or the night grows too still, I hear his voice again. That smirk-turned sentence, echoing across all those wasted years. My dad would never let himself be that weak. And I whisper back to no one, to everyone, no, Alex, he wouldn't. But I did. And look who's still standing. So tell me, was I wrong to walk away? To let them face the emptiness they built? Or was it the only way to prove that even the weakest man has a breaking point?